Good afternoon and welcome back to the University of Maryland at College Park, the Riggs Alumni Auditorium, for today's NASA Future Forum. Thank you for joining us live on NASA TV or via the internet at www.nasa.gov/ntv. This afternoon we have two more panels for our Future Forum. If you have questions for the panels, we'll be taking questions from the audience here at the stationary mics in the room or from the internet via Twitter at our Twitter account of @NASA_technology or through the conversation hashtag of #NASAFuture. This afternoon we're going to start our opening panels with a panel on technology investments and benefits, transferring and commercializing NASA technology to benefit our lives. Our chair today for that panel is Dan Lockney, our program executive for technology transfer at NASA headquarters. Dan?
Thanks, Dave, and welcome back to NASA's Future Forum. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Since the beginning of NASA in 1958, ingenuity has powered the nation's ability to explore and to get us out into space. It's also fueled economic competitiveness, and that's what we're talking about here today. In 2010, the President and the U.S. Congress gave NASA a new mission, a new direction, and interestingly called on us to build a sustainable program of exploration and innovation. And in today's difficult budget environments, that's hard to do. It's going to require careful and strategic investments to reach that future. And while not easy, it is achievable if we don't go it alone, if government reaches out to industry, if we work with partners in industry and academia, and with international partners. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Part of this future is going to be our reaching out to the American industry and create a truly environmental, a truly sustainable way forward. And today you're going to hear from some fantastic panelists, leaders in innovation, leaders in industry, and some fantastic scholars who will share with you their experiences of working with NASA, what they're currently doing with space-based technologies, and how we can most effectively use the environment of space, the technologies created for space, to advance our missions, but also bring public benefit back down to Earth for the benefit of Maryland and for the benefit of the nation. So I'll let them speak for themselves. First up, we have Dr. Jayfus Doswell. He's got some great companies. Juxtopia is one of them I think he'll be talking about today. He's also got some interesting other projects that I hope he touches on. Great stuff, and fellow Baltimorean, welcome. We've also got Dr. Gilmer, Blankenship, the University of Maryland, and then a cool life-saving technology that saved thousands of lives and a 30-year partnership with NASA. And this is a fantastic story, too, that we're happy to bring to you. Mr. Gendelman, fantastic biofeedback device. He brought one with him, and that's just exciting. Just wait to see this thing. It's very cool. We've been talking all morning about the future, and he's got it in his pocket. It's very neat. And then finally, Dr. Henry Hertzfeld. There's been a lot of questions about investment, return on investment, how we calculate what we get out of this investment in space technology. And Dr. Hertzfeld is the nation's and perhaps the world's preeminent scholar in this area. So now, Dr. Doswell.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for allowing me to present to you today. I think we're living in a great time of new space exploration, commercialization, and entrepreneurship. My name, of course, is Jayfus, Dr. Jayfus Doswell, and I own a biomedical and information technology company in Baltimore, Maryland, and also chair a not-for-profit organization that inspires young engineers to get inspired about entrepreneurship and also to apply what they've learned in the classroom to build things and innovate. But let me start off with legislation. We're at a time where we have the American Competes Act, Executive Order 13329, which is to encourage manufacturing in the United States, as well as the National Robotics Initiative that President Obama released at the end of June. Exciting times when we think about what's going on in space right now, what excites us, like autonomous robotic systems going to Mars, teams around the world competing in the Google Lunar X Prize Challenge to put a robot on the moon by 2014. We're living in a time where a lot of the space technologies that NASA invests in can actually help with companies and solving problems here on Earth in our everyday lives. And I'll give you an example. One of the programs that my not-for-profit runs, we put a team, the team Gendelman, into this Google Lunar X Prize Challenge, this challenge to put a robot on the moon by 2014. And we're the only team in Baltimore, the only team in Maryland, and one of the only teams on the East Coast to try to achieve this. What's more significant, though, is that the team is comprised mostly of student engineers ranging from electrical, mechanical, industrial design, computer science / software engineers, artists, and they're taking this challenge because they're inspired by NASA's history and inspired by the fact that they can apply what they've learned from their class, even though they may be 18, 19, 20 years old, and actually make this thing happen, and really stand on the shoulders of giants when the Apollo mission type of engineers at that time, they're in their young 20s, early 20s. So these are the things that we in Juxtopia try to do to inspire the youth and also provide opportunities so that we can take the technology as a platform that we do for, I guess, space missions and see how that platform can be relevant to Earth with autonomous robotic systems tying into the National Robotics Initiative and really achieving service-based robots to help people here on Earth. So I can talk on and on about my company. I also chair biotechnology at Sir Journal Douglas College, inspiring, various biological pursuits in biomedicine that can be transformative, both in, interplanetary, both in NASA space missions here on Earth. And it's just, it's a wonderful time to be here. Wonderful things that can come out of technology transfer. We have a Space Act agreement with NASA Goddard, and we're looking at technology that can actually be transformative from NASA Goddard as technology transfer to actually create companies or to create components that work into our existing systems. Lastly, in terms of minorities getting into or underserved and disadvantaged small businesses getting into this game, which traditionally has, certain communities probably didn't feel like they can get into this space, this thing called space technology or space business. We have a former Redskins player, for you Redskins fans, looking or in the audience, Ken Harvey, former Redskins player, Alan Herbert, an aerospace engineer. They created a space company for satellite servicing just because they're excited about space, they're excited about the technology, and they see the mission for the United States in this area called satellite servicing. So a lot of these things like NASA, as it started off with a dream, started off with inspiration, formulated the rigor to actually in the engineering discipline to make it happen, and then put their minds to the task to do something that was incredible, sometimes, not doable, but was achievable nonetheless by staying to the task and never giving up. And I think even though we have this down economy and an economic challenge, if we keep that same mindset, we can achieve that same thing. We can achieve the impossible and really bring NASA into the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Doswell. Next on the panel, we'll hear from Dr. Blankenship, University of Maryland. Dr. Blankenship.
Thanks very much. So I'm Gil Blankenship, a professor at the University of Maryland. But I'm going to talk to you about some activities that a company I own has been involved with NASA. So the company is called Technosciences. We've been working with NASA since the late 1970s. I think you can tell just by looking at me that's a possibility. And we've worked on a very kind of obscure NASA program. It's one of the ones most people have never heard of, called Search and Rescue Satellite Aided Tracking, SARSAT. And this is a program that was started in the late 1970s as a research program at NASA. In the early 1970s, a very famous congressman named Hale Boggs died in a plane crash in Alaska, and a very extensive search, hundreds of people, lots of resources, was mounted, and they looked for him for weeks, and they never found anything, no wreckage, nothing. And as a consequence, Congress mandated that there should be a system developed that could address this kind of incident. And so NASA was given funding in the late 1970s to design and develop such a system. And our company, Technosciences, was formed around that time. And my colleague, Lee Davison, who was a professor at the University of Maryland, was the CEO of the company. And he and a couple of other engineers developed signal processing algorithms that would allow one to locate distress beacons using Doppler processing of signals relayed by satellites. The system was declared good, I guess, and ground stations were built in the 1980s. In 1988, Technosciences began to build and sell ground stations. Since that time, our company has installed these systems in 20 countries around the world. The system as a whole has led to saving more than 28,000 lives. In the U.S., in a typical year, between 250 and 300 people are saved by the system. So if you want to look at cost-benefit, and it's a terrible sort of gross thing to do, in the U.S., an average life is valued at $3 million. Mine, I think, maybe a little less, but anyway. So in other words, around $1 billion a year is saved in terms of productivity by this simple system. Costs a little bit to run every year. NASA probably invested $20 to $40 million to develop it, but the return on investment has been enormous. If, as I have done, you meet someone whose life was saved by this system, you never forget it. So just 2 or 3 months ago, I met Abby Sunderland, a young woman, 16 years old, who decided to sail around the world. She got most of the way. Her boat ran into trouble in the South Indian Ocean, which is one of the most sparsely traveled oceans in the world. She turned on her radio beacon. The signal was relayed by satellites to a ground station in Pakistan, which was one that we had just installed, and then from there around the world. And a couple days later, the Australians arranged for her to be rescued by a fishing vessel out of Madagascar. So it's a very concrete illustration of how important this kind of technology is. It was funded by NASA. It's now operated by NOAA, the U.S. system. But if NASA had not stepped up, provided the funding, engaged very intelligent and skilled engineers in the design, we'd be missing more than 28,000 people. So it's been very important. Recently, a new system was defined. NASA provided funding in 2004 to build the next generation search and rescue system. This one is much better. It's faster, it's much more accurate, and it easily provides global coverage. And it enabled Technosciences to design not just the ground station, which we've done, but also to build a next generation beacon. So the goal is to have a beacon the size of a cell phone. Here it is. My staff requires me to carry this because as I've gotten older, I get lost more often. But if you turn on this tiny beacon, virtually anywhere in the world, within a few minutes, thousands of people will know where you are and they will come and get you. It's an amazing process. So I'm not going to turn it on, otherwise the Coast Guard would come streaming into here. And let me mention a final business aspect of this. Our company is one of 2 companies that make this kind of ground station. There are around 35 countries around the world that will buy it. This will generate about $200 million in revenue to us and our competitor. Not so much to them and lots for us. All of this money derives from a NASA investment of around $3 million. All of it will flow into Maryland, except for the little bit that my competitor will get, the very little bit. So when you think about it, NASA Goddard invests $2 or $3 million. Maryland will have as much as $200 million flowing through it over the next 5 years. I think it's a great story. I just want to emphasize again that the University of Maryland played a very key role in this, not just because I'm a professor running this company, but also because my predecessor really laid the groundwork for this system that has proven so effective over the years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting. We often get asked at NASA, what do we get for this? What's the return on investment? What's in it for me? And these are really examples of that. Space technology is coming back down to Earth to benefit us in our everyday lives. We've got 28,000 people being saved with these rescue beacons. We've got Dr. Doswell working with minority and traditionally disadvantaged businesses in Baltimore to help them get access to space technologies and create companies. This is great stuff. This isn't the full and sole intent of NASA's research, though. I mean, these are secondary, even tertiary missions. Nonetheless, they are very real, and you're hearing about them today. Next, Mr. Oscar Gendelman. I'll let him speak for himself. I think this is a cool technology he's brought to show you.
Good afternoon. I want to start by telling everybody that I'm very honored to be here this afternoon, particularly in the Riggs Center, because I am an alumni of University of Maryland. And in getting started here, I will tell you that this story is, to a certain extent, all about Maryland. And it starts about 8 years ago when Zephyr Technology was originally formed. And it was formed by a group of, if you will, physiologists and sports enthusiasts who were building body sensors to measure all different kinds of things. They were a small engineering services firm. And around 2006, through a government partnership with the New Zealand Trade Enterprise Group, based here in Washington, there was a broad agency announcement from DoD to build a system to remotely monitor physiology in people that were in extreme environments. And it covered special forces as well as first responders. And through the New Zealand partnership, Zephyr, who was based in Auckland at the time, went ahead and responded. And they won the BAA. And it was really the springboard that changed everything. So they began collecting the bits of technology that they had started on, and they put it together, and they built what today is known as the bioharness. And this bioharness is a chest-strappable device that's used to remotely measure the physiology as the government had requested. But what the sensor does is it measures heart rate, breathing rate, skin temperature, and it has accelerometers in there so we can tell whether you're standing right side up or upside down, whether you're moving a little bit or you're not moving at all. But more importantly, we had a big following as we were going through the development, and one of the early adopters was the NASA Ames Center. And there were two researchers down there, Bill Toscano and Pat Cowlings, who are a husband-wife research team who was working on basically reducing the motion sickness effects for the astronauts. And they put a program together that was called Autogenetic Feedback Efficiency Training. And essentially what it is using biofeedback to get everybody to deal with the situation that they're in. And they used the bioharnesses in order to collect the data, and they put together basically a 6-hour training program that helped everybody deal with it. More importantly, the results of it were that 65% of the people that went through the training were able to reduce the effects, okay, completely. 85% of the people that went through it were able to reduce some of the effects. The important thing is that we aided NASA in doing what NASA does best. And one of the things to bring out from the first panel, Dr. Leshens wants to go to Mars, and she's worried about the motion sickness. Let me tell you that NASA has the solution. And it's through this partnership that we're able to do that. But it doesn't stop there. Today, Zephyr Technology makes a whole array of products for the consumer side of physical fitness training, as well as the professional series, where you'll see our products in strength and conditioning on special forces, both on the Army and in the Navy. You'll see it on first responders and typically specialty teams, where they're doing CBRN work or hazmat, anybody who's wearing some form of protective gear. And the issue is really trying to address the remote identification of fatigue, trauma, dehydration, or some other ailment. Because you know that these people are out there on a mission, and they're trying to accomplish a task, and if you ask them if they're okay, the answer is always the same: yes, I am. And this way, we have a little bit of biofeedback remotely, and we can help them, not only while they're in a live operation, but also in rehab. So over the years, with the help of NASA and some of our other early adopters, what we've done is we've embedded this technology in fitness training, in live operations. You will see it out in academic research, literally in hundreds and hundreds of universities. And we've benefited from the whole partnership with academia on a number of different levels. And one in particular was a study that was done out of the University of Wisconsin, where, for any of you who have ever done a fitness test and you've worn the spirometer, the gas mask, it's a little bit trying. We are the only product that is certified to be able to do a full fitness test without the gas mask. Okay? And when you look at it on that level, that actually helped us take the next step to be able to push this through FDA, and we now have an FDA-certified device. Taking it to the next level and going out to the market, what Zephyr's been able to accomplish because of the things that have been published through the academic world and through the government chain is that we find ourselves with some absolutely fabulous partners that are opening all kinds of doors. Today, the products are opening doors within the healthcare industry through our partnerships with Qualcomm and AT&T. You'll find us with the sports market through another product that came out of Maryland, which is the E39 shirt pioneered by Under Armour. And we work that one in partnership with them, and we have an ongoing relationship there. So to answer the question about the benefits of a government investment in a product, what I can tell you is that had we started sitting in Auckland in an engineering office trying to commercialize a piece of technology to hit so many markets around the world, we probably wouldn't have been able to conceive it. However, through the investment that the government has made, we find ourselves based right here in Maryland. We're based and headquartered in Maryland, up in Annapolis, right near the Navy football stadium. We are creating jobs here in Maryland, and more importantly, we're manufacturing the bioharness in Baltimore. So this is a story of how the partnership is not only bringing products to life-saving type of applications, a whole bunch of different realms, but also bringing jobs into the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And that shirt is cool. Very neat. Next, and I'm very excited to hear from Dr. Hertzfeld, George Washington University. As I mentioned earlier, he looks at all of this stuff and tries to add it up. I'll let him speak for himself. And Henry, thanks for so much for making it here. He flew in last night from Europe, got an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of sleep. maybe 3, and then made his way right here. So thanks again.
I got a little more sleep than that, but thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a professor at International Relations at the Elliott School and the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University. And I've been looking at technology transfer at NASA and the programs for quite a number of years. And before I prepared a few remarks, but one thing struck me. I didn't come with shirts and neat technologies today, because I look at the broader picture. Economics can be boring. I hope I won't bore you, but one of the things I think was common is that the NASA investment was actually quite small, but it stimulated a lot of other research, and it does take a lot of money to make a commercial product, to market it, to distribute it. Many magnitudes of what the actual research that started it off would be. And I think that that's a very important benefit. It was a but-for. If it hadn't been for NASA, a number of these companies would not have gotten started or succeeded. And so there are really clearly a lot of benefits to the economy that can be traced back to NASA. And the numbers are large, they're robust. The problem is we do have a lot of trouble measuring the macro impact of NASA technology. And there are a number of good reasons for it. And there's one other thing I'd like to try to clear up. I was asked to comment on measuring the ROI, a business term meaning return on investment, to NASA's technology and NASA's technology transfer investments. I've been arguing for years we can't do it. There really is no such thing to government investments. And you can't use the normal business tools, those the MBAs learn in their courses, things like net present value, internal rates of return, something measured to 1, whatever it may be. We don't capture what we've heard today out of those numbers. And why not? Well, first of all, because in our economy, we're going to focus, of course, on our impact on gross domestic product, which is basically everything that's sold in the economy. But when the government spends money, there's a convention used in the way the government accounts for that. It's not an investment. It's spent in the year that it's spent, and then it's gone. So it's not like a business. The government has a reason to spend that money. It's mission-oriented. NASA's mission is aeronautics and space, and many of the projects you're all familiar with underneath that. Other agencies, of course, have other missions. If they're successful, that's great. They've accomplished their mission. We as a nation benefit. Sometimes individuals do, but it's a collective benefit. And all of these benefits are hidden in that gross domestic product number. So we don't really have a chain that starts from people investing money in a company, marketing something, and then a revenue from that product. We have a different environment when we're talking about government investments. And some agencies, economic development agencies, spend money directly to create jobs and to create other opportunities. When that money stops, when Congress says no more, there are no more jobs. When we're talking about research and development and an investment in knowledge and technology, these are building blocks. They stay. Even if you stop spending money, what you have spent in the past continues on into the future, and it is important, and of course it's important to continue spending those dollars. So there's no reason why any government official should be focused on competing with business. You don't need a 40% pre-tax return, such as a venture capitalist might want. You have other reasons. It's the businesses that do that, and those numbers are oriented toward the commercial sector. Similarly, you don't need to, well, step back. Almost anything that we measure in these spin-offs and in the overall benefits and impacts from government and NASA programs that's greater than the amount that was put in is icing on the cake. Anything more than one-on-one is good. So I don't think that we have to make grandiose comparisons to show that we're successful. There are also many other ways, many of them unquantifiable, that we benefit from NASA technology programs. I've listed 5 or 6 of them here. First of all, improvements in the quality of life. There are many of those. We've heard a couple of examples today in the search and rescue and in some of the medical instrumentation and other things like that. I mentioned the opportunities are out there for business to build on the early research efforts of NASA and take them from the uses they have in a government mission to successful commercial products. Many of the improvements are process-related. They're not physical products like this. They're better ways of doing things inside the companies, better lubricants, better clean rooms, number of other examples. And they're not as tangible, but they're also faster to get into the productivity numbers of individual companies. Management innovations. NASA handles big projects very well. Some of those computer programs and other things have been adopted by the commercial sector. Trying to measure the value of information. Knowledge is information. It's very, very difficult, but it's very important as well. And a lot of the research ends up as knowledge. We're all familiar with education and training efforts that NASA has. They're important. And we've even stimulated new industries and new capabilities. The very big things, some of the telecommunications services and capabilities are directly related to early NASA research. So in many ways, this isn't a numbers game. It's more than that. And it's the long-term value rather than the next quarterly business statement that's important from the perspective we're looking at it today. Just quickly, if you insist, I'll give you a flavor of the estimates that others have made in the past of returns to the agency. I can point you to a study that says there's a 3-to-1 return, a 7-to-1, a 9-to-1, an 8-to-1, a 14-to-1, you name it. Anybody can justify those numbers. And I think that a lot of it's folklore, it's good publicity, but justifying those as accurate rates of return really does not occur. It can't occur. It may be larger than that, it may be smaller, but it's there. And the number is really irrelevant. I'll leave you with one last thought. All of these studies look back into history. We've measured average returns from investments in the past. Nobody has been able as yet to measure what economists would call the marginal return to the next dollar spent, the additional returns that we're going to get from what we're spending today on technology and NASA. All we can say, though, is if history is the yardstick, it's been pretty good. And I think we should go ahead and we can, on the basis of that in good faith, justify our investments into the future. Thanks.
Fantastic, and thank you. Dr. Blankenship, I think you had a response.
So Henry, since I was one of the ones who was making flamboyant claims for return on investment, in fact, I was the one, I agree with you completely. As a scientist, I understand how difficult these things are to measure. But as a businessman and promoter, I think it's very important to promote this, that a little program NASA started long ago has led to saving so many lives and will have a very significant business impact in the state of Maryland. If we win most of the $200 million I mentioned to you, that'll be 100 jobs, 200 jobs, people working in Maryland. These are very tangible things, and I think to the extent that NASA can point to these things, we made something that saved 28,000 people, we brought 100 jobs into Maryland, and so on. I think this really matters a lot. Our congressional delegation cares about this, they get excited about it. That it's associated with the university is even a better thing. So I think these kind of numbers, even though you and I know, well, I think they go a long way to helping NASA establish its great value. NASA is probably one of the 3 or 4 best things our country has ever done, and somehow the fact that we are here trying to promote NASA is good, but on the other hand, it doesn't need promoting. This is one of the best things the country's ever done.
Well, unfortunately, I think it does need promoting because many of these benefits and many of the things NASA does are several layers removed from what the public sees as the expenditures and the impacts. I mean, they see the rocket science, they see the launches, and then there are, from the very beginning of the agency, there are the critics who look at and say, well, we have all these social problems, we have poor people and bad housing and other bad conditions, and education isn't what it should be, and things like that. Why should we be doing this? And there's always been a disconnect at times between the results and the expenditures, and trying to draw those lines a little more clearly, I think, is quite important.
David.
Okay, thank you. Now, again, the fun part. We'd like to take your questions. Please feel free to step up to the microphones here in the aisles. We'd appreciate any questions you have from here in the audience, and we're also monitoring our Twitter account at NASA_technology or the conversation hashtag #NASAfuture. Do we have any questions from here?
Well, I have a question, David.
Dan?
In discussing the need to come up with some numbers to help promote and generate support for NASA, and we're talking not just with the public. We have a high rating amongst the general public, but also it's proving in this tough budget time that it's a value. I'd like to hear from both Asher and Jayfus. Jayfus in the sense of how the small business community is benefiting from NASA, and I think that's part of the story. It's not a number, but first from Asher, I believe the device was used to rescue, in the rescue as part of NASA's involvement in the rescue the 33 miners in Chile, and I was wondering if you could speak on that for a second. I think that's the real story, more so than the numbers sometimes, this human interest story.
From the work that NASA does, they obviously monitor people in extreme environments, and they have a tremendous amount of data on that. And when the accident happened down at the mines in Chile, NASA was one of the first ones on site. And because of the work that we had done with NASA, and once they found that the miners were alive, they called us in. So Zephyr's gear was actually on the miners down in the mine. And we, for what it's worth, we have a fellow on our staff. His name is Ben Morris. He's a Marine. Never a former Marine, but a Marine. And if you've ever worked with the Marines, they have a backup plan for their backup plan. And he went down as a part of the team on the ground in Chile. And they had put some specials together in order to monitor the vitals inside the capsule for the ascent and to work out a handful of scenarios to monitor the miners in the mine. At the end of the day, They worked with a sports physiologist who's a partner of ours in Chile, and they put exercise regimes in place. They monitored the health and well-being, and also using certain capabilities that are in the harness to be able to measure their stress levels. And they put some protocols in place to keep everybody in check. And obviously, we know the end of the story, but if it wasn't for the work at NASA, I would tell you that these gentlemen would not be with us today, and you wouldn't see some of the artifacts down in the Smithsonian in the exhibit that opened last week.
Thanks. And I really think that that is the type of human interest story that needs to be told more from NASA, and that's the type of thing that people really need to hear. Jayfus, you work a lot in Baltimore with the small business community through your Space Act with Goddard. I was wondering if you could tell us some of the impacts of that, where you intend to go with that, and even some of the challenges too.
I can tell you an early story with technology transfer. I guess this is about 2003, 2004 when I was starting to learn about technology transfer, a little younger than what I am right now. And I learned about this thing called One NASA, right? So there was technology at Langley and there was technology at Goddard to solve a problem. Problem is that you have 6 million pregnancies in the United States, approximately 4 million births, and then you have a significant amount of fetal loss due to hypoxic ischemia, loss of oxygen to the fetal brain can cause adverse health effects and fetal mortality or morbidity. In some cases that researchers have seen cerebral palsy. My vice president of Juxtopia is both an MD and JD, and this was really his interest to decrease fetal loss. And so in talking about numbers, we looked at all around the different agencies from the Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, to NASA. We found out that in Langley, there was this equipment called, there was a fetal monitor that Langley had created.
The baby beats, I think you're referring to.
Right,
fetal
right.
heart monitor. Yeah.
Fetal heart monitor. We looked at that, and then we said, okay, the heart monitor, as you know from physiological type of responses and interpretation, you can't have really the monitor or sensor without the interpretation, which requires software algorithms. So I said, okay, I'm a PhD in computer science. I think I could figure this out. I could probably write the algorithms myself, probably take a long time, or we can do the numbers game again, hours of work, or I can go to an agency to see if this algorithm pretty much exists, take it off the shelf, license it off the shelf, rather, and see how it could be integrated to complete a solution and exemplify One NASA. So we looked at that. Now, this was a lot coming, to a technology transfer from the very first time. How could we actually solve this problem, looking at both a sensor and an algorithm called the Hilbert-Huang transform, HHT, that's since been licensed someplace else. And we looked at that as a solution. But of course, we had other barriers, but we looked at that as a potential solution, and we plan to come back to that table again. Now, we do, from a lot of our experiences since then, mentor a lot of minority companies. One company in particular has just submitted a provisional patent, so I can talk about this, to tech out a tennis racket for the very first time. So this inventor, tennis coach, not a scientist, tennis coach, right? So you know what, I want to actually improve the game of tennis. I want to make sure that when you're educating a tennis player, that the rotation of the tennis racket, the swing of the racket, just like the Wii on the court, could be done realistically instead of on in front of a TV screen. So we looked at all around the places, and we said, okay, let's look at NASA, because we need an accelerometer, a gyroscope, a pressure sensor, a way of actually when the ball is hit, other sensors, and plug it up to your iPhone and get immediate feedback on what your play game was at that point. So he's looking at NASAtechnology for that. My technology that I was funded for my company from the National Science Foundation is a wearable heads-up display. Think Iron Man, optical see-through display, voice recognition, step-by-step instructions on a visor. So when a comic medic is doing a needle decompression as a response to a tension pneumothorax and needs to put that needle in the second and third intercostal space, I mean, I've gone through this like a salesperson over and over again. So I'm not a medic at all. My father was a sergeant combat medic in Vietnam, not I, right? But he briefs me. So, you know, it's a lot of technology. You need an embedded computer, you need gyroscopes, inertia sensor, magnetometer, miniaturized camera systems, GPS, you know, beam splitting technology, all integrated into a headset. And we think to ourselves, we can find the microelectronic mechanical systems, MEMS or NIMS, nanotechnology version to actually make this thing happen. We can probably do it ourselves and engage our students as a good class activity, but why do that from a cost perspective, cost-benefit analysis? Go to an agency like NASA, look on the shelf, see if it's there, integrate, license, and put it into the commercial marketplace. And those are the things that that's the process. And the process is extremely important from a cost-benefit analysis standpoint. Economy, you know, challenged a little bit. And a lot of this investment in terms of our tax dollars has gone into some great technology components that are available as subsystems that can be integrated to make a product worthwhile. And those are just two examples, but we have countless if you want to talk with me after the session. Thanks a lot.
Sure, thank you. And I'm sorry you didn't get your hands on the Hilbert-Huang transform. It's one of our cool Goddard technologies. It's a suite of patents that we licensed it through one of our new innovative programs where we auctioned it. You're wondering, so how do I get my hands on NASAtechnology? We actually had a public auction, and we're opening these to bid for, you too can have some NASAtechnology.
Yeah, the Hilbert-Huang transform was out of Goddard.
Out of Goddard, right.
NASA Goddard.
It looks like there's a question in the back.
Hi, Jeff Dennis at Spaceworks. I guess this question's more for Dr. Hertzfeld specifically, but so you were talking about how you know, the government isn't as interested like a commercial entity that might invest based on, you know, which project has the highest NPV or has the greatest return, but you know, the government might not necessarily be as interested in that specifically. You know, they're looking for something that's more about, you know, the greater good, I guess. And then, but with the idea that there still is only a limited pot for them to invest with, and that, you know, if they do invest in projects that have more return, you know, potentially there could be bigger pot in the future. I guess how do you weigh those things against each other? And I guess ultimately, by what criteria would you want to decide to invest in?
It's a very good question. You're talking, I was talking about studies basically that are after the fact, looking back. You're talking about investment decision strategies, which opens up a whole nother conversation, really. And you're looking far into the future sometimes only a year or two, sometimes you're in government investments, you're looking 10 years or more. Into the end of a project. And there are techniques that exist, and the government is not investing randomly. I hope they are not, at least. But the whole way of setting priorities does come down to sometimes cost effectiveness, cost benefit, and various analyses of the budget. So coupled with where you're going in a mission and what you need to accomplish that mission. So I'd rather not spend time now opening up a totally new topic. Be glad to talk to you a little bit later. But the government does have at its disposal different tools and than business, different objectives. Some tools may be the same and are usable, and I certainly hope those here who are at NASA are, and I know that the process is very complex, but it's not irrational either.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add something to that. Part of the issue is not so much designing or looking for the return on investment on a piece of technology from the government's initial spend. It's more what happens between the industry and maybe the venture market in terms of spawning alternate technologies. And as an example, there was a gentleman just before lunch who was asking a question about remote monitoring in a healthcare environment. And you know, that is obviously that's something that is on everybody's mind because it's in front of us, it's expensive, we all have to deal with it. And I can tell you, like in our case, off of the Chilean miner incident, it spawned a whole new generation in technology for us. I happen to be wearing one of the next generation straps, and I'm actually wearing a healthcare monitor, and I can push my ECG up to the web portal and push it for somebody else to go and look at it. So it's not so much the government spend from a standpoint of getting to the final product, but they are the catalyst that makes the innovators step forward and create all kinds of human capital and IP for industry.
So do you suggest a sort of like, you know, spread a wide net approach to technology just so that you can see what people will pick up?
Absolutely. You know, when you look at it, somebody raised the issue this morning in one of the other panels about failures. Failures are really a wonderful thing because you learn so much from them. And if you don't have enough failures in terms of your investments and what you are able to develop, you're not doing enough. Because out of 10 or 15 efforts, you might have 2 or 3 successes, but they overshadow all your losses. And you have to keep going out there and trying and pushing forward.
If I may add to that, about 10 years ago, I did a study on the returns in life tech transfer, life sciences, and I interviewed a number of companies, and most of them were doing okay. Some of them didn't exist anymore, even though they were on the books. But there were 1 or 2 that really had the other end. There were tremendous monetary rewards from their projects. So the idea of having a portfolio and portfolio analysis is absolutely important. And if you're going to invest in new technologies, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, basically, and you should have alternatives. Something is going to work. You may not know which one it is at the beginning, though.
Dr. Blankenship, you had a comment?
no, let her ask
Okay.
a question.
There's a question up front.
My name is Rita Sambruna, and I work out of NASA headquarters. I'm the program scientist for WFIRST and Physics of the Cosmos program. And I have a practical question for those of you who do partner with scientists at centers or in academia to develop new technology. When you do that, what kind of practical constraints and limitations do you set for the teams? Because many scientists are reluctant, may be reluctant, to see their creativity being, channeled or constrained. So I wanted to ask, what kind of practical limitations do you have when you partner with them?
Dr. Doswell?
It's a very good question. Juxtopia partners with many universities: Johns Hopkins, Morgan State University, Coppin State University, Delaware State University, Morehouse School of Medicine, and Bowie State University, among others. I'll particularly talk about one research project that was funded by the National Science Foundation to work with Johns Hopkins University. One of the first things that we did after we discussed what we wanted to do, we did a patent disclosure following a non-disclosure agreement and created an agreement where we ratified it. Here's our terms, here's our intellectual property, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, what we share is what we share. Pretty much standard MOU type of language, right? That set a platform of trust on paper, because the consequence of infringement can be devastating for both parties. So many times when there's a university and an industry type of collaboration, we see it from our experience that that's a must, that's imperative, right? From then it's a relationship on the scientist trusting to disclose more information for the benefit of his or her own research and also for the benefit of the university. And I'm a hybrid. I'm both a professor and an entrepreneur like many of the panelists today. And I think that's pretty effective from my experience. You know, establishing first the agreement and then building the relationship, you know, with the scientist.
Yeah, I can comment on that too. Our company has worked very closely with the university, particularly the aerospace engineering department. So for the last 5 or 6 years, we've probably funded $3 to $5 million worth of research in that department. And the relationship has been fantastic. We work with the licensing office to make sure that everything that we're doing meets university requirements. The faculty members are compensated or else funded directly through the university. So for us, it's been a fantastic thing, and we've had many, many interesting projects come out of it. And I can mention just one which relates to the NASA SBIR program. We received an SBIR contract a few years ago to build a damping system for payloads in the space shuttles based on magnetoreological fluids. If you can spell that, I'll give you a prize. And it was a success. We proved that you could build this device, but of course it won't be used in the space shuttle in the future. And what we did after that was adapt it to military vehicles, in particular to ground vehicles. And we just did a test at the Army Research Lab recently showing that soldiers inside a vehicle, sitting in seats equipped with this type of damper, would almost surely survive an IED. So it's an amazing transition from securing delicate payload to protecting our troops, and we're very proud of that fact. So this is actually transitioning into the market now. There are shock absorbers that you can buy. In the past, they were for Cadillacs and Ferraris, but soon they'll be on Humvees and other practical vehicles. So in this case, the partnership with the university was essential. That's where the MR fluid technology was developed. The idea of using these as a damper was a university idea, in fact. So it was very, very important to us. Working with the licensing office, getting the agreements in place, as Dr. Doswell said, is very, very important. But if you're careful and if you build up a program of trust, it can be a great success for both sides.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. This came in via Twitter, and I don't know the answer to it. I think it's for Jayfus, said Dr. Doswell. What is the Solar System Express?
All right. I think this is, this is a great story, right? I'll keep that for sure. All right, so you've heard of the Google Lunar X Prize Challenge. It's a worldwide challenge. The cash prize is $30 million. Germany has a team entered in the challenge, as well as Singapore, I think China, Japan, all around the world. And we have this team from Baltimore, like True Grit. If you've been in Baltimore, you know the deal. I'm third generation Baltimore. You can't even be an entrepreneur. I mean, I have my own little rules about entrepreneurship and what it really means, especially urban entrepreneurship. When you don't have anything, you have to raise your SBIR money, which we've done many times, and get other state-based grants because a certain micro-enterprise, it's hard to get a loan or VC capital. And so you have to have true grit and really make it happen and never give up. Well, this is coming from a young man, I know who he is, Blaze Saunders, who has that true grit. He's the captain of the Google Lunar X Prize German team. He's about 25 years old, and he started a company based on his inspiration of space. And this young man is like a space fanatic, which is a good thing, and he created his own company to develop contract engineering services, and also to spin out some things that we're doing in the Google Lunar X Prize Challenge commercially. So the short answer of, from this question is, what is Solar Systems Express? That's the name of this company. So I guess you wanted me to talk about it. It's a good thing, great thing. So look out for Solar Systems Express. And interesting enough, which is even cooler, his name is Blaze Saunders. Blaze. You can't get any better than that. So there it is.
Cool name.
It's a cool name.
And with that, I thank you, gentlemen. It's been a lively, interesting conversation. Thank you very much. David?
Okay. Thank you to our panel. We're going to take a short break of about 10 minutes and start back up at at 2:45 p.m. Eastern. We'll be back with our final panel of the day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Sure. I'm still coming up to Eastern. End of the month.